Welcome explorers, I am Shoaib Akhtar and today I am going to present our project on SPDC of photons via pulse pump along with my group Ramakant Pal, Shlok Dhrutraj, Ayush Raj and myself. So our aim is here to study the finite width pump beam when it is illuminated on non-centrosymmetric crystal and which further leads to the generation of biphotons. We take the two generated biphotons to be collinear, that is to say, the wave vector points along same line. And we further have two situations that these two generated biphotons can have same polarization or they can be orthogonally polarized. So we study the two cases respectively, type 1 and type 2. So what is SPDC? SPDC is a spontaneous parametric down conversion and it is coherent three photon process. In SPDC, a non-centrosymmetric crystal is illuminated with a pump beam. The pump beam is taken to be intense enough so as to drive the oscillation of the electrons in the crystal into the nonlinear region so that the second order effects are reached. That is to say, if we write our Hamiltonian as H0 plus Hi, we take high intense enough pump beam such that the nonlinear effect, that is at least the H square, the Hi square is contributes finitely. The second order interaction results in the annihilation of a pump photon and leads to the creation of two down converted photons which are named as signal and idler. So what is happening is that we have a crystal and we illuminate it with a pump beam and the pump beam is absorbed by the atoms in the crystal. The atoms get excited to the higher energy state and when they come down to from high energy state to the lower energy state, two photons are released. One of them is called signal and the other is called idler, just to give names. Since these biphotons are released when the atoms comes down from the higher energy state to lower energy state, these are called down converted photons. um, and the created photon pairs are entangled in space and time, and so equivalently they are entangled in their wave number and frequency. What we study here is the nature of the down converted photons, that is their coincident count and other things when the pulse beam is taken to be narrow enough. So as I mentioned, we are assuming here the signal and idler, the generated by photons, to be degenerate. That is, they have same central frequency. Otherwise, things will become very complicated. And now we have two situations. One when the two generated by photons have same polarization, and the other when they are orthogonally polarized. We study them case by case. So here we have our interaction Hamiltonian. So the integral is over the volume of the non-centrosymmetric crystal which is being illuminated, and this chi is nonlinear substitutary tensor. This EI and ES are the electric field corresponding to the idler and signal, and EP is the electric field corresponding to the uh, pump beam. This EP, the pump beam electric field, is taken to be a classical field. That is, you can think in a sense that we are controlling this pump field, and we can control the value of the pump field, and so it is in a way acting like an environment. Okay, but the idler and the signal electric field has to be quantized because these are being produced by quantum processes occurring within the crystal. That is, the crystal absorbs the pump beam, the atoms are excited, and these idler and signal photons are released only when the atom de-excite from higher state to lower state, and this is a quantum process. So that is why we are in a way forced to take this idler and source photon to be quantized electric field. Although strictly speaking, EP is also a quantized electric field, but to make our life simple, to make the calculation simple, we can approximate it to be a classical field. So now we come back to our pump field. The pump beam is taken to be linearly polarized and propagating in the z direction. It is taken to have central frequency omega p and an envelope of arbitrary shape. That is, I factorize the electric field in this fashion. I separate out the central free omega p frequency part and an envelope part. This envelope part also have time dependence, but writing in this fashion it clarifies us that omega p is a central frequency part, and this e tilde p is written as integral of some ep bar times its phase factor. So this looks like a Fourier transform, but it is not really a Fourier transform because of the other phase factors coming up here. So, using the interaction Hamiltonian, we can now compute the state vector on the output face of the crystal. To the first order in the interaction, the state vector for this collinear case, the collinear case is that the two generated by photons have same the wave vectors of the two generated by photons point in the same direction. Up to first order, the state vector is calculated to be this. So what is this? This is basically the sum of this ground state with no photon and a state with two photons. The signal and the idler photon. Okay, so we can also understand this very intuitively. That is, what we are trying to say here, that the state vector is essentially the sum of vacuum state and the two photon state. This AS dagger and AI dagger are the creation operator for signal and idler photon respectively. So when they act on the ground state, they produce a biphoton state, and we appropriately multiply it by spectral function and then sum over the possible quantized wave number. So what is then f is doing here? We can think it as follows. Suppose one operates the creation operator corresponding to extremely large wave number, then what happens? Obviously, the probability for that to happen is going to be very small, since the pump is only providing finite amount of energy. And this will be a case of severe, and so there will be a case of severe phase mismatch between kp, ki, and ks, but the probability can still be non-zero because of the energy time uncertainty principle, something which we study in our qm course. Hence, the spectral function is essentially capturing the probability for the biphoton pairs to be the given, or to be of the given wave numbers. Okay, so thank you. Now I hand over to our friend Ayush Raj, who will talk on type 2 conversion.
So I'm going to talk about the biphoton amplitude for the type 2 down conversion process. So essentially, what is type 2 SPDC? It's characterized by signal and idler being orthogonally polarized with respect to each other. As a convention, we take that the extraordinary ray is the signal and the ordinary ray is the idler. Well, the thing behind all this is what we call as double refraction or birefringence. It's basically an optical property in which a single ray of unpolarized light passing through an anisotropic medium split into two, and they both travel in two different directions. One ray, which we dub as the extraordinary ray, is bent or refractive at an angle as it travels through the medium, while the other one, the ordinary ray, just passes through the medium unchanged. In double refraction, the characterization, the very feature of double refraction is that the ordinary and the extraordinary ray are orthogonally polarized with respect to each other. Their polarization vectors point in perpendicular directions. The refractive index, one more characterization is that the refractive index of uh, the medium along the direction in which the ordinary ray travels is constant while it changes along the direction in which the extraordinary ray travels. This property is central to what is called as the uniaxial crystals. Uniaxial because there's one special axis uh, along which the refractive index is different compared to the other two axes. And that special axis is what we call as the optical axis or the extraordinary axis. Uh, What we have here is a type of uniaxial crystal called the negative uniaxial crystal. Basically, it means that the refractive index in the direction in which extraordinary ray travels is less than the one in which the ordinary ray travels. Hence, the extraordinary ray travels at faster speed. Uh, the central quantity of interest to us over here. So before I talk about this, let me tell you briefly about the setup of the experiment. So this is the pump beam through which the initial photons are being fired. This is the crystal where all the game is happening. It's basically down converting the photons, producing the biphoton pairs. Then there's this beam splitter and the detectors. This is a rough setup. A detailed setup will be provided later, but for now, this should suffice. So yeah, so the central quantity of interest to us over here is what we call as the coincidence count. Okay, so the coincidence count is basically it's that probability of the photon to actually form an entangled biphoton pair. So what I mean by that is that not all the biphoton pairs that are produced are entangled. We are interested in only those which are, and hence this is just a measure of that fraction of biphoton pairs which are actually entangled. And this is the expression of that thing. Uh, I'll define what capital T1, capital T2 is later. For the moment, I'm defining what E's are. The E's are electric fields at detectors 1 and 2. Subscript 1, subscript 2 correspond to 1 and 2. Now, how do we get this? Of course, I could have written the whole thing that's already present in this journal, and hence I'm providing a link to that. The field at detector 1, we just do a mode decomposition. So we mode decompose the field at detector 1 to be of this form, where A is the annihilation operator, E omega is some defined quantity, which I have written over here. You can go through that. We define few more quantities, small t1, which is defined as capital T1 minus L1 upon C, where L1 is the optical path length from the output face of the crystal to the detector. So basically, it's this distance. Starting from here to starting from here to the detector, the edge of the detector. So this length. Uh, yeah, and the E2 is similarly defined, just that you put in an extra iota factor. Why? Because we know that the other beam is orthogonally polarized with respect to the first one. We now define this quantity. Essentially, we are looking at this inner product. We are interested in this inner product, and we define this. We note that E2 plus is essentially complex conjugate to E2 minus, and hence you can write it this way. And we define this smaller inner product, the inner product of the ground state uh, uh, and the state psi when acted upon by E2 plus and E1 plus as the biphoton amplitude or the two photon amplitude written as AT plus T12. By definition, it's this where we have introduced these quantities. T plus is half of T1 plus T2 and T12 is T1 minus T2. Now, what are these quantities? Small t1, capital T1, small t2, capital T2. Well, Ti is just the time with, at which the beam comes out of the outer edge of the crystal, and capital Ti is the time at which the beam hits the detector, which was very clear, right? I mean, the way we define these two quantities. So essentially, the difference measures the time of flight, if you want to say it that way. The index 1 is associated to the signal, the extraordinary ray, while the index 2 is associated to the idler, the ordinary ray. T plus you can think of it's just the center of momentum, the time it takes for the center of momentum to come out of the crystal. Okay. Now we are interested here for in a special case. The special case is when we have placed frequency filters around omega s equal omega s. So what is omega s? It's the central frequency of the signal pulse. Similarly, omega is the central frequency of the idler pulse. We are interested in only these cases where these two match, the central frequencies match. Okay, and we show that this the biphoton amplitude reduces to this expression. Now, essentially, I'll just provide a proof of this because I found this to be quite interesting. So what you do is that you take this definition of A, right, and you plug in the expression of psi that we had in the case of the one that we defined in the interaction Hamiltonian section, this one, and you put it in here, and you get this expression, this big one. and you put in the definition of E1 plus and E2 plus. I've just written it over here again, and you note that the first term simply vanishes because the annihilation operator acting on the ground state just gives you direct zero. The second term is non-zero, and it's very easy to see that you will just pick up two Dirac deltas. The first Dirac delta would be Dirac delta of omega and KSCS. The second one would be Dirac delta of omega prime and KICI. And when you just simplify that, you get this expression AT plus T half is this expression. Now we consider this special case, which is called crystal being cut. What it is that basically the frequencies, the central frequencies satisfy this relation phi omega s plus omega is omega p. You define this capital K and they satisfy this relation capital Ks plus capital Ki is capital V, where capital Kr, where R is either of SIP, is defined this way, NR omega R upon C. Now again, some quantities over here. What we you can show is that the wave number Kr is essentially capital Kr plus nu R upon ur omega R, where nu R is the frequency of that of the rth component, where R is SIP, and ur is the group velocity of the beam. Now we just define the phase mismatch factor as we usually do, the del Ks Ki, just Kp minus Ki minus Ks as usual. And we take the we write it in terms of uh, the other quantities, the Ks, Kis. Sorry, there should be sub I sub S, and you put in the relations that we previously established or previously stated, and you get that del Ks, Ki, the phase mismatch factor must be this expression. Okay, where the quantities have just defined the terms over here. You can just go through the calculation. Now you write the biphoton in term. You split it into two integrals or two terms, so as to say. The first one is the slowly varying term. So it's sort of a two-state approximation technique, which is very frequent uh, in physics. If you look at you split the integral or your equation in two terms, one that rapidly varies and one that slowly varies. So the first one is slowly varying term, and the second one I is this definition. Is just I just have plugged in the expression of f. It may look cumbersome, but essentially plugging in the value of f as we defined before. F is just a spectral density function, and you just see this is just exponential of some quantity minus I something from minus infinity to infinity, and when you integrate over this whole range, you just pick up Dirac deltas as usual, and this Dirac delta essentially reduces this cumbersome integral. You can easily show that it reduces to this form, the one that we wanted to obtain, where the quantities are defined this way. Now, this expression that you see over here, pi t 1 upon dl, these conditions that t being dl to 0, pi t is this, otherwise 0, all this comes from this Dirac delta. It's very easy to see that. Yeah, so basically we have established the equation of the biphoton amplitude that we wanted to derive. Few things that I'd like to say. Uh, the effect of the finite pulse width of the pump is essentially contained in this expression W, and D plus L is just the measure of the time at which, or the difference in time at which the center of momentum of the biphoton and the pump take to cross the crystal. Okay, and there's this special case when D plus is zero and they both arrive at the same time. When D plus is not zero, then there's this quantity that we defined earlier, T plus, which is essentially T half D plus upon D, which you can easily check. That tells you the relative difference in time of arrival of the center of momentum of the pair and the pump out from the crystal, other end of the crystal. And this essentially is what we initially commented in the introduction section. The difference in time gives us a way, gives us a measure at which depth was the biphoton actually born, because D plus and D are actually functions of omega, actually function of L, or Z, so as to say, the depth at which the biphoton was born. And hence, this gives us a way to characterize, okay, which biphoton pair was born at which depth. And this gives a very easy way. This leads to decrease in indistinguishability that can be observed in two. So basically, you can now distinguish, okay, this pair was produced at this depth, this pair was produced at the other depth, and so on. And this can be summarized in this Feynman diagram that we have over here. So you have this crystal that extends from -L to 0 and passing the initial ray and splits at certain depth into extraordinary and ordinary. Of course, extraordinary comes out first because we know the crystal is negative uniaxial. And yeah, basically this is a Feynman diagram of whatever I stated in the last paragraph. Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you, Ayush. That was a nice talk. And now our friend Ramakant will take the talk ahead.
Here to talk about one of the experiments in the paper, that is type 2 SPDC driven by a narrow pulse. Before starting the experiment, uh, I want you to keep 2 points in back of your mind. First one is that we are here doing an SPDC experiment by a narrow pulse, and we will change the pulse width and get different results and infer the things from that. And the second thing is that the central quantity of measurement from the experiment is the coincidence count, and the coincidence count is equal to the square modulus of the biphoton amplitude, and that biphoton amplitude is defined as the product of these three functions as Ayush has derived above. So this is coincidence count and square modulus of the biphoton amplitude. Okay, so now starting the experiment. This is the experimental setup. As in like any SPDC, there's a pump beam and there's a BBO crystal. We have taken BBO crystal. The pump beam will shine light on the crystal and SPDC will happen. And the biphoton will emerge from the output phase. So before that, let me clarify that the pump beam which we are taking will emit the Gaussian pulses, and its width is defined as full width at half maximum, so it will be 2 sigma. Sigma is here in the equation, and since BBO is a negative uniaxial crystal, so the signal and idler will be emitted will have a phase difference at the output phase of the crystal. I tell you how. So in negative uniaxial crystal, the ordinary ray travels slower than the extraordinary ray. That's why there's a that's why it will lag in terms of phase at the output of the crystal. And here we are defining the extraordinary ray to be our signal and ordinary ray to be our idler. And the phase lagging difference will be this T12. T12 is defined above. Okay. So after that, the biphoton will go into the phase plates, and the phase plates will do exactly opposite what had happened in the crystal. That is, in that the O ray will travel faster than the E ray, and that's why it will gain a phase of tau, and E ray will lose a phase of tau. Okay. So after that, the beam splitter, which is a polarization dependent beam splitter. So now you know that the signal and idler, or so to say E and O ray, are orthogonally polarized. So the beam, so that means their polarization are different. So the beam splitter will split them, will split the O and E ray and send it to the linear polarizers. Now the linear polarizers will align the polarization of both the rays so that they can interfere at this CC. Also, one point left, the beam splitter will split by reflecting the E ray and transmitting the O ray. Okay. And these detectors will detect the photons and note down the times capital T1 and T2. Yeah. Okay, so this was our experiment. Now let's move on to calculate the coincidence count, which is the square modulus of biphoton amplitude. Okay, But Ayush has derived this as a product of these three functions with the assumption that the phase plates and linear polarizers were not there. But in our experiment, they are there. So the biphoton amplitude will change from this expression to this expression. Okay. So if you look closely, there's not much difference between these two terms. Just there's an addition of this tau factor which comes from the phase plates, and the linear polarizers will align them in the same direction. That's why there's a negative sign, and this negative sign comes from the reflection. So let me clarify it. So assume from the output phase of the crystal you will get the biphoton. Assume its amplitude to be A. Now since we are taking the degenerate case, the amplitudes of O and E will be A by root 2. After that, passing through the phase plates, O ray will gain a phase of tau and E ray will lose a phase of tau. Beam splitter will reflect the E ray and transmit the O ray. Now the linear polarizers will again decrease the amplitudes by a factor of root 2 because it is at 45 degree to both the rays. And after that both the rays will interfere at CC. And that's why we are now, since the linear polarizers align them in the same direction, their amplitudes can be directly summed, that is scalar sum. But here there's a negative sign instead of addition. Why? Because of this reflection here, reflection of the E ray, and it will pick up a pi phase of pi and it will be extracted as a negative sign. Okay. So simply we have added their amplitudes at CC, right? And their amplitudes are basically half of the biphoton amplitude, with the argument of tau as a phase difference, as an extra phase difference, because T12 was already a phase difference. Now tau and minus tau are the extra phase differences. Okay. So this term, if you look closely, it is simply this, where tau is added to T12. Why? Because T12 was the previous phase difference from the output phase of the crystal. And now after passing through phase plates, this tau will add on O ray and will subtract from the E ray. Okay. So this term I had explained you qualitatively how the biphoton amplitude becomes this. And now a little digression from here for the better understanding. Assume that we are taking, instead of pulse, we are taking a plane wave, and for that we have to keep W equals to constant. So we have taken W equals 1 because W is the factor which tells us about the pulse width, or the pulse factor, that is the wave is a pulse. Rather, if we assume W equals to with some constant, then it will mimic a plane wave. Okay, so now the amplitude will be like this simply. And to get an idea what will be the coincidence count, I had just plotted this function in the square brackets, because on taking the square modulus, this nu of t will anyway give a scaling factor. Okay, so these are the plots for different taus, plot of this function in the square bracket, these two functions. Now how this plot came, so you know the function of u from the above, that it is simply a square pulse of length dl and height 1 by dl, and you simply plot the graph by u of x to be this, then u of minus x would be reflection, and then negative of this, Okay, so that's how we will plot them, and if you put a factor of tau, then the graphs will got shifted, and that's how it will get. Okay, so the notable thing in it is that when these two terms will get zero, that is when these two terms will completely overlap to each other, is when tau equals dl by 2. Okay, dl is the length of this square pulse. Okay, so when tau equals dl by 2, these two terms will completely overlap, and the biphoton amplitude as well as the coincidence count will go to 0. So this was for the plane wave case, but but even after inserting the W, you can think that this biphoton amplitude will get its minima at tau equals dl by 2, right? Okay. So now if we want that in our case, that is in our experiment, if we want that this to be 0, then and then tau equals dl by 2 as well as the arguments of w has to be equal, right? That is, both condition has to be satisfied for the complete overlap of these two products. So if we put these two conditions, that is tau dl by 2 and the arguments of w to be equal, then we get this condition, that is d plus have to be 0. Okay, so what's the meaning of this? So for that, understand what d plus is. You know what tau is. Tau is basically the phase factor which we get from the phase plates. But what d plus is? So the d plus is basically a property of the crystal, but as a function of the central frequency of the of our pulse which we are inserting in the crystal. Okay, so now since a we are taking a pulse of central frequency, of constant central frequency, here our d plus will not be variable. Okay, sorry, so where was I? So yeah, I'll just show you the condition for the complete overlap of these two terms. Okay, and that requires the vanishing of d plus. Okay, now coming back to our experiment, we had we had defined the biphoton amplitude to be this, and the new u and w functions are defined above. Simply plug in those values and we will get the coincidence count to be this. Okay, so also it is a segmented function, as you can expect, because from these plots, as you can expect, that tau equals dl by 2 is a point of breaking, right? Yeah, so this is a 3-segment function, and so in the ERF term is basically an error function term, which is defined as this: the normalized Gaussian interval between a limit of the argument of error function. Okay. Yes, yeah. So this error function is not related to any errors in the measurement or in the experiment. This is simply a mathematical tool. Okay. Okay. So now we had done the experiment for a specific sigma, but we will vary the sigma and repeat the experiment. So I had plotted the graph of RC versus tau for 3 different sigmas. So the first one, red curve, is for sigma equals 10 femtosecond. Green one is for 100 femtosecond, and blue one is for 1 picosecond. And so as you can see that on decreasing the sigma, it is on decreasing the pulse width, the depth of this RC is decreases. Okay. And also one more thing, this 1 picosecond pulse can be seen as a plane wave, right? Because it is much more spread, so it mimics the plane wave basically. Now what does it tell us? So so it tells us Okay, so what does it tell us? Before that, let's understand a concept called a clock concept. I mean, this experiment, this setup will work as a clock. How? So see, assume instead of the Gaussian pulses, if we had sent an impulse, that is uh, that is a Dirac delta, right? So Dirac delta impulse, if you send in the crystal, then the biphoton will born and the signal will get detected here, right? And suppose we are sending the train of the Dirac deltas at an interval of 1 seconds. So first Dirac delta will go and first photon will get detected. After 1 second, second photon will get detected. And after 2 seconds, the third photon will get detected, and so on. So it can now act as a clock. Sorry, it can now act as a clock, right? But instead of Dirac deltas, we are using here is the Gaussian envelopes. Okay, so let me tell you. So yeah, so and the biphoton will only born in the crystal when the whole width, that is whole sigma, will come inside the crystal. This is our width. That is when the whole 2 sigma will come inside the crystal. Only then the biphoton can born. But here the problem is, suppose this peak came, right? Then biphoton can born at this place also or this place also. And if it will born at here, then it will get late on reaching detectors. And if it born here, then it will reach early to the detector. So that reaching early and reaching late to the detector is the uncertainty in the clock. The clock which will detect the photon and ticks, right? So that's what our graph RC versus tau by DL tells us. That the more the depth, the more will be the uncertainty. So yeah, so we have seen that if the sigma is less, then the uncertainty in the clock is less. Okay, thank you. Now Shoaib will continue for type 1 SPDC by Narrow.
Uh, Thank you, Ramakan. Now I continue talking on type 1 conversion. So here I first describe our experimental situation. Here what we have done is that we have cut our sent crystal appropriately so that the emitted beams are not collinear. And this is very important because in type 1 conversion the generated by photons are taken to have same polarization. So if we don't separate it initially, then we can't separate it using beam splitter. That is, it is in this case it is important to separate the biphotons initially to pass them into different detectors D1 and D2, and then to count and then to evaluate the coincidence count. So this is why here we need to cut the crystal appropriately and separate the beams initially. So as you saw in Ayush talk, where he gave you the definition of biphoton, the two photon amplitude, you can use the similar technique with a slight modification to do the calculation for biphoton for type 1 case. And as I was mentioned, the calculation for biphoton for type 2 is an enzyme problem whose solution also he displayed. You have to just go through the similar analysis. There will be a little modification needed. And why the modification is needed, as we know, because in type 1 case we have same polarization, so the situation is a bit different, and that's why a little modification will just lead you to these results, and these results are displayed on the screen. The biphoton amplitude factorizes in a similar fashion, not totally same. The vt function is same as in Ayush case, here the argument just changes. Okay, it's t plus, and the t plus is appropriately defined for us. Okay, so if the biphoton is thought of as being created at the point Z inside the crystal, then the width of the biphoton described by T12 oscillates and increases because of the dispersion. As you can clearly see from this phase factor coming up here. Okay, so at the exit phase of the crystal, the biphoton width is approximately under root 4 modulus of d double dash z. So this is basically this Gaussian width which is coming up here, but here why there is mod inside, since we are having the crystal and we have set up our coordinate in such a way such that the right edge of the crystal, the exit edge, is at the coordinate z equal to 0, and the left extreme edge is at coordinate z equal to minus l. So all the position inside the crystal are having negative z. So just to make things just to take care of this fact, we like to take mod here. The length of the biphoton is just determined by the pulse width. If the biphoton is imagined to be created at z, its center of momentum located at t plus lags or lead accordingly, as described by the d plus z, the modulus of d plus z, depending on the sign of d plus. And one thing we should note here is that in all this calculation, we have very well ignored the dispersion of the pump beam, since it will be negligible except for very narrow beam. We can check for Gaussian, say, and it comes out to be near 20. For Gaussian, it comes out to be 20 fsmm. Okay, for our usual typical length of the crystal. So this is why we have ignored here, but yeah, our aim is to understand the finite pump width, so we study that in next slide. Okay, okay, so our aim is to understand the effect of finite pump width. So to illustrate the effect of finite pump width on interference, we consider a new experiment or described in the picture. Now this time the crystal is cut appropriately to provide the signal and idler degenerate photon at particular angles which are selected by the pinholes, which is similar to what we did previously. But this time we have made a little modification. A variable optical delay tau is inserted into the interferometer in the idler photon path, which is being followed by a 50-50 beam splitter. Now, in case of a continuous pump, the state emerging from the beam splitter is of this form. These T indices correspond to the transmitted beam through beam splitter, and the R corresponds to the reflected beam. We and now here we are omitting the terms which are not leading to the coincidence, which gives zero coincidence count. The negative sign here comes from the 290-degree phase shifts upon reflection at the beam splitter. Here this idler and the signal, they had already suffered a reflection, so there is a 90-degree phase change, and so when they suffer a, and then we are and when they get reflected from beam splitter, so a new 90-degree phase shift is added, which results into 180-degree, and so we get this minus sign. Now to do the detailed calculation for biphoton in this case, we have to calculate the electric field at the two detectors D1 and D2. Now here I walk you, and and on the screen I have displayed the equation for electric field. I will give you a brief justification of why this holds. Okay, the electric field at D1 gets its non-zero contribution from both the idler photon and the signal photon. The idler photon reaches D1, but before that it passes through a tau delay and then through a beam splitter. So that is why through the with AI we have exponential iota omega tau associated it, but with AS we have iota factor associated. Basically iota is e ki power iota pi by 2, so we see that a 90-degree phase shift is associated with AS. And we can clearly see that the signal photon can reach the detector 1 only after getting reflected from the beam splitter. And similarly for E2 we can see that the signal photon reaches by getting transmitted through the beam splitter. So this time we don't have any iota factor associated with it, but with with we have iota factor associated with the idler photon because it reaches after getting reflected from the beam splitter. So we have this iota factor here, and this exponential iota omega tau is just this tau delay. Okay, so now I hand over to my friend Shlok Dhrudraj, who will walk us through ahead.
Where Shoaib left, we got E1 and E2 taking into account the transmission and reflection at the beam splitter, where E1 is the electric field at the first detector and E2 is the electric field at the second detector. So we ignore the transverse coordinates here because we don't want to take into account the minor effects that they cause. So we plug in the values in the formula for the biphoton amplitude and proceed to calculate it in a similar way which we did in type 2 biphoton. So uh, after putting the E2 and E1 in the expression, we get this particular expression. So then we proceed to apply the conditions for cutting the crystal and phase matching. But here we run into a problem. So what happens is the term D disappears. So to make up for this, we incorporate the second order dependence on nu uh, for signal and idler waves. The second order term, that is D double prime, that is physically attributed to dispersion. So we define D double prime as the double differential of k naught with respect to omega at half the central pump frequency. Then we proceed as we did before and get the biphoton in this form. Okay, so the first term in the square brackets, it corresponds to the case when the signal and idler are transmitted wholly by the beam splitter, while the second term corresponds to the case in which they are reflected. So from this, it follows that the biphotons that are created farther apart than the pulse width, they do not interfere. Uh, Alternatively, we can also say that the disappearance of interference can be attributed to the fact that the two terms in each biphoton are distinguishable by the time their center of momentum leaves the crystal relative to the time the pulse leaves the crystal. Now we come to the central quantity of interest, the coincidence count. In this expression, you can see that we have scaled down the quantity and used RC of 0 as the scaling factor. Similarly, uh, in, in this expression, we have also introduced a function j, which also we have scaled down by a factor of j of 0. So, uh, continuing with the calculation, the j of tau is defined as the real part of the integral of W1 and W1 star, product of W1 and W1 star. So uh, expanding it and assuming that the pump envelope is a real Gaussian, we do the calculations and plot the coincidence count function versus tau square by d double prime L. Okay, and so here we might be presented with a question: what is g of tau? So g of tau may be understood as follows. Assume that tau is 0 for now. Then what happens is the two amplitudes gets cancelled, and that cancellation is always complete because each biphoton created at a given point in the crystal interferes destructively with itself. Okay, so and when it's not when tau is not 0, the interference occurs between the amplitude for the biphoton created at different times. So uh, that is reflected in J of tau. The exponential term then shows that the interference between the amplitudes for pairs created at Z1, Z is the basically the distance from the output phase of the crystal. Uh, so uh, so the interference between amplitudes for pairs created at Z1 and Z2 becomes small when basically D plus into Z1 minus Z2 modulus that becomes large compared to the pulse width. So if the pulse width is large, there is no interference. Okay. So um, then the pairs created are distinguishable because their packets do not overlap. That is, there is no interference. Then that's why this quantity measures different times of arrival of the pairs relative to the clock provided by the pulse. So as we have discussed before, the pulse acts like a clock with an uncertainty equal to its pulse width. So that's what's happening here. If the photon pairs are created in uh, an interval of z which is less than the pulse width, then they do not interfere at all, and they are totally distinguishable. So for tau equal to 0, the dispersion gives rise to a term 1 by under root, which is proportional to inversely proportional to the square root of dispersion. So the decrease in interference is due to the fact that the amplitude for a pair created near the input face of the crystal dispersion causes it to broaden, while the amplitude for a pair created at the output phase does not. Therefore, the overlap between these amplitudes is less than the overlap that is expected. That is expected for pairs created very near to each other. That is, which are created for Z gap is less than the pulse width. So this basically leads to the decrease in width of interference pattern that we have observed. Um, so next we'll take a look at the plot and try to analyze it. Look at the plot. The first difference that we observe is that now we are plotting versus tau square by d double prime L as opposed to tau by dl. So d, as we have already discussed, has vanished and we have replaced it by d double prime. And since d double prime is a second order dispersion term, that's why it is accompanied by tau square instead of tau. So uh, what happens is the dispersion of the biphoton causes the second order effect. So we observe that as we in the plot, as we increase the value of sigma, uh, the initial dip it becomes wider and wider, which basically means that if you keep increasing the pulse width, that is sigma, the coincidence counts rise slower and slower because the probability of two biphotons being created within a distance that is less than the pulse width, causing them to interfere destructively with each other, it increases. So that's why there is less and less probability of getting a coincidence count because they interfere destructively with each other and it's difficult to distinguish them. That is, they are indistinguishable with each other. After that, we can also take a look at peak width and interference width. Both of these depend on dimensionless quantities A, B, C1 and C2, where A is equal to delta tau square by d double prime L, B is equal to d plus L by 2 sigma, and A and B are related with each other through the relation 1 by A square equal to C1 B square plus C2. Here C1, C2 are numerical constants and delta tau is the interference width. So finally, concluding all the analysis that we have done till now, we have gained valuable insights into type 1 as well as type 2 SPDC, both degenerate photon pair case, when the source is a pump emitting light pulses instead of a continuous beam. So in the type 2 case, we had observed that the use of a pulsating source instead of a continuous one, along with having a uniaxial faceplate with fast axis parallel to the ordinary rays, we can observe interesting effects on the coincidence count. For a specific setup, which is a specific value of tau by dl, the coincidence count can even be made zero. A possible application of this could be finding out the alignment of fast or slow axis of uniaxial crystals, uh, where you basically change the of the alignment of the crystal uh, until you reach uh, until the coincidence count is detected to be zero by both the detectors, and hence you can conclude that to be the fast axis of the crystal. In the type 1 case with the same setup, we might expect to have similar results. But as a result of similar polarization, the effect of dispersion comes into the picture. This causes the biphoton to have an inherently smaller width, and the coincidence count is non-linearly affected by the time delay, which causes oscillations in the coincidence count plot. This has possible applications in the creation of 4-photon entangled systems. Thank you.
Yeah, so allow me to walk you through the NSIM problem. So basically, you're asked to derive the expression for the biphoton amplitude for the type 2 case, type 2 SPDC, that's carried out via pump pulse. So this derivation is explicitly being carried out in one of the previous sections. Let me just show you that. Yeah, it's over here. So this is the expression that we expect you to derive. Uh, and all the necessary steps, which I believe should be over here, are given step by step. And you can refer to this if you don't strike a breakthrough. So this is it for the NSIM problem. Of course, we encourage the people who are interested to try out the same for the biphoton amplitude for the type 1 case. But we emphasize that this is not a part of the NSIM problem. Okay. So yeah, thanks guys for sticking with us for the past 1 hour. If you're still over there, and yeah, thanks.